Hello, this is Sonia Thomas providing a health and wellness conversation with our guest today, which is Jamila Edwards. Jamila is a healthcare professional who today will speak to us on mental health and how it impacts our community. Jamila, thank you so much for being here today. We're going to start with something real easy.
All
Just tell me
right.
a little bit about yourself, your background, and what led you to your current field.
Okay. Well, I love easy. So thank you for starting me off with the easy. My name is, like you said, Jamila Edwards. I was born in a little small town called Hutchinson, Kansas, but that is not my claim to fame because I've been to Kansas City. My mother moved us here when I was 5 years old. So I live, drink, embody Kansas City, Missouri. I love Kansas City. I'm from what we call from Kansas. In Kansas City, we say down north. So I am from down north. I'm from Parade Park Homes. Very proud. Um, I'm very proud to be from Parade Park. So that's a little bit about where I'm from. And I know we'll get more into like, where what I do now and like how I got into the field. So that is just a little snippet of who I am.
Okay, sounds good. That was very easy. So let's get down to it.
All
So
right.
tell me your career path. So let's start kind of in the reverse.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about what your educational background is, and then we'll roll back into what made you come into this field.
Okay. Well, you know what? I currently am I've been in social services for about 25 years. I started when I was one. So I've been in the social service field for about 25 years. But actually, I didn't start out because I'm in social work now. So I have my master's in social work, but my bachelor's degree is actually in criminal justice. So I started out in criminal justice, wanted to work with the juvenile delinquency population. In my first job out of college, I was in that population. But what led me more to social work is what I noticed is that because when I got out of college, I got a job in the field, juvenile delinquency. I worked at a facility. And so what we were seeing was in the program, and I worked with young men, most of them young Black men. They did wonderful while they were in our program. They had so much growth. We were so proud of them. But what happened was when they went back to their environments, they would either come back to our facilities. Unfortunately, some of them were murdered. Some of them were actually put in adult prisons. And so for me, what really stood out is that we were missing the family component. Like that family system work wasn't being done because we did have like family days where they would come up there and they could do visits, but there was no real like therapeutic work, no really system change because the family, they got to be the catalyst for change. And so we're sending them back to their own environment. So I really got disheartened by that. So I just had a friend that was working for our child protective services here in Kansas City. It's called Children's Division, formerly DFS. And she was working there. So I was like, well, what do you do there? What does DFS do? Because what I knew, they took people's kids, food stamps, Medicaid. They help people apply for that. So she told me what she was doing, and she was actually a case manager who worked with families, and she worked with the whole family system. So I was like, okay, that's the job for me. So that's how I ended up getting into more family work. And then from there, I got opportunities there to earn my master's of social work, where they actually pay for me to get it. And I had mentors along the way that helped me, determine like you would be perfect for this field. There's so much you can do in the field of social work. And so from there, it just kind of grew. Like I kept, I was in the field. I worked for Children's Mercy Hospital for 12 years, and I got clinically licensed. So I'm clinically licensed in Missouri and Kansas. And from there, that's when I started doing therapy. So I started doing therapy in about 2013 is when I've been doing therapy. And I still do therapy one day a week for a private practice. But my main job is, and I know we'll get more into this, I'm a director of clinical services for a nonprofit agency here in Kansas City, right on 27th and Truce, called Amethyst Place.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about what it is that you do at Amethyst Place because they serve more than just the individual. They serve the family, like you said, sound like what your passion was and what really drew you deeply into the field. So talk about Amethyst Place and the services they provide.
Yeah. So we're most known for being long-term supportive housing. So that's what we're known for because we do offer housing to families, but we do so much more. You know, we've been in existence for almost 23 years now, and it did start out as just housing only. We started out on 6th and Benton. It was just 6 units, and at that time it was housing only. But as Amethyst Place grew, the support in the community grew for us, we were able to expand. So we currently have 2 apartment buildings. Like I said, we're on 27th and True. So we provide long-term supportive housing, and that's key because what we found is that like a lot of times with these families, especially because we work with women and children, and so the women are they have a history of substance use. And so what they found is that a lot of times if they just had like stability in some place to lay their head and get stabilized, that they can, you know, not only get in recovery but also manage to really overcome some of the other, you know, trauma experiences they have had, and also other like barriers that they have to moving forward with their life. So we provide long-term supportive housing, but now we currently offer other services right there on site, wraparound services. So when families come to Amethyst Place, they're able to get therapy services, they're able to get case management services by our staff that are right there. And so we work where they live. So we're placed right there where they live. And so they have access to us to be able to get those services. But there's other like basic needs. We have a pantry that is accessible to them. We have a clothing closet. But I think it's just so powerful to see what these women can do once they have stable housing. And when they move in, fully furnished apartments, they don't have to come with anything. They're fully furnished, and we make sure that we figure out what families coming in, and we make sure the bedrooms are decorated for the boys or the girl, whatever children they have. And we make sure that that is the first piece of them having stable housing. And after that, everything else kind of falls into place, like all those other services that we provide for them.
Okay, that's amazing work that you all are doing at Amethyst Place. So I want to kind of change gears and be a little more specific about the work with you that you do regarding mental health.
Sure.
So tell me, when does mental health start to kind of creep up for folks? Like, is there a certain age? Is there something that triggers a mental health episode or a recurrence? What tell me more about that.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people have heard of the ACEs study. So that stands for adverse childhood experiences. So that's key because a lot of times when you've experienced adverse childhood experiences, and some examples of those are having a parent that's incarcerated, having a parent with a substance abuse history, being exposed to violence in the home. Those are just some of them. There's many more, but just having that exposure at a early age, and they've even found like in babies, they are predisposed for different types of mental health disorders, especially anxiety and depression. Those are two of the big ones because that stability is not there when they're young. So I there's not a particular age, but it can be as young as, I see kids in seeing therapy. I've seen kids as young as 3 and 4 where you can do some play therapy things with them. So it just really depends on the individual what can cause that, because there can be, other things that have happened, maybe not in childhood, but a lot of trauma. We see a lot of trauma in, but when we see, like a lot of times, like I always ask about trauma history, because a lot of times we see in these schools, like a lot of kids are diagnosed with different things that may be just like trauma symptoms, like a lot of ADHD and ADD symptoms, they mimic trauma symptoms, like not being able to concentrate, being very, hyperactive. That can be trauma symptoms. So a lot of times trauma, and not everybody that has experienced a traumatic event requires therapy services, but there's a lot that go unaddressed, and so it can manifest into more serious mental health concerns if that trauma is never addressed. So I know that was like a loaded answer, but like, yeah, just there's not really, I don't think there's like one age or one determining factor that causes a person to experience mental health concerns or issues.
Okay, that's interesting when you talk about the fact that ADD or ADHD can really present itself as that, but it may be something else. It may be trauma.
Yeah.
And so, as a parent, you think there's something going on with your child. You take them to the doctor, and they tell you that hey, your child has ADD or whatever the case is. How, as a parent, do you identify for yourself or kind of advocate that you don't think it's that, you maybe think it's something else? The child has experienced, a parent leaving the home, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and it may have caused the child to have some different behaviors. How does a parent differentiate
Yeah.
between what might be that diagnosis versus
Mm-hmm.
trauma?
Yeah. I will say the medical system has gotten better. A lot of times doctors are still using the medical model, but we did lots of education. So now they make even some residents go through some kind of training like about trauma and things like that. So they're more trauma informed. And that's what it is, because that's a big key buzzwords in hospitals and clinics everywhere, being trauma informed. So because people are more trauma informed, you would hope that a medical provider wouldn't just automatically assume like this is ADD or ADHD without getting more history or really trying to figure out under the layers like what's going on. So as a parent, you said it best, having to advocate. So if you know like these things have happened with your child, like like there's been some kind of like big change in their life, because sometimes big changes can bring on like trauma symptoms too. You as a parent, you can be very vigilant about like, hey, I think I want to like maybe explore a little bit further or look a little bit deeper to see if there's something else going on, and really having that open communication with your child. And I know, especially when kids get into adolescence, they don't talk with their parents about everything. But if you open those lines of communication early, hopefully your children are communicating with you about some other things that may be going on other than just a diagnosis of ADD or ADHD. And in our schools, like our children, our Black children, boys and girls, are diagnosed more with ADHD. They're labeled earlier on. So as a parent, as a Black parent, as I had to be, you had to advocate, because I had to advocate for my son. They try to label him early on, and I just had to be in there, and this is before this is before like I was, when he was in high school, I was just starting to do therapy. But what I hope is that we can do more community events like this to educate people, because I'm in the field, so I know how to advocate for my children. But other parents that are in the field, they don't know like what to say or what to look for. And a lot of times we look at the medical providers as the experts, but parents are the experts on their kids.
Right. Very true. So, as far as the therapy piece, you said that one of the wraparound services that you all provide there at Amethyst Place, and then also what you do outside of Amethyst, is provide therapy. So,
Mm-hmm.
when you said that you work with kids, as young as 3, is there an age that is too young to address, what a parent may suspect as trauma, or hey, my kid is really hyper, they just won't sit down,
Yeah.
those kinds of things? Is there an age that's too young for that?
Yeah, I would say a lot of times, like if they're not verbal yet, it's really hard. I mean, with play therapy, they don't have to be like real verbal to do some work. That's why it's called play therapy. They can demonstrate some things through play. And so about 3, well, I think would be, the youngest, like you could see in like a play therapy type setting. Anything under that, it's really too young, because, some of that, like a 2-year-old being hyperactive, like that is some normal development stuff. They're exploring their world. That's what they're supposed to do. They're curious. They want to know. And so, again, sometimes especially our kids get labeled as kids like, oh, they're hyperactive, or this is not a kid that's, a troubled kid. It may not, but I would say like probably anything under 3 is too young to try to provide any type of therapy services to.
Very good to know. Also, I want to talk about therapy in general.
Mm-hmm.
So, in my opinion, it seems that our community, the Black community, is the least um, willing to participate in therapy, right? We think that's something that we don't need to do because we should be strong and we should lean on a higher power and those things. So let's kind of talk about that. Do you feel over the years that you've been practicing that stigma has kind of reduced some, or are you finding that people are just hanging on to that? What's your thoughts on
Yeah, I see it on both ends, because I see more persons of color seeking therapy services. And I think it's more because like even in the entertainment field, you see it more out there, like Taraji P. Henson, she's a big mental health advocate, and other people. And then we've seen people like recently, I can think of Twitch, who committed suicide. Like that really has forced us to have these conversations. So I think people have become more open to it. Like in our community, Black people have become more open to it, but there is still that stigma. And especially it's generational too, because I think, some of the older generations still like, we just pray about it and it can, we'll work it out. But one thing that I am very excited about is that the churches are now recognizing, but yes, you need us too as your pastor, as your minister, but we also need this other component, a mental health professional. So a lot of churches are doing more mental health advocacy and more work with their congregation so they can like reduce that stigma of this is all you need. All we need to do is pray. And so I do see it both ways. And so again, like forums like this helps to kind of lessen the stigma and normalize like us seeking therapy services, because it needs to be out there. And I think the more it's out there and it more normalized, I think the more like our community will be comfortable in seeking therapy services. But yeah, it's still out there. It's still out there. We don't do therapy, Black people don't do therapy.
Right.
We
Right.
strong. We don't, yeah, but and that's what happens. Like we feel like we always got to be strong, and it's okay not to be okay.
Very nice. Because a lot of times I'm not okay and I'm on the phone
Yeah.
trying to figure out who can I go talk to about what's
Okay.
happening. So now that we're talking about therapy and really into it, tell me about how have you seen the landscape change as far as providers of color? Are you guys easy to access? Is there a network where we can find, folks of color? Because, it may just be that's who we want to talk to and that's who we feel more comfortable talking to. So, what do you think about that and the options for folks of color?
Yeah. There is not enough clinicians of color. I will say that, even though we have grown. I will say, like, as far as providing therapy services, there are more clinicians of colors to choose from with therapy services. Like when we get into psychiatry, man, it's almost like I could probably count on one hand or maybe two hands how many psychiatrists are here in a county as big as Jackson County, Kansas City. There's very few Black psychiatrists. When I work at Children's Mercy Hospital, I was the only Black therapist, and and we didn't have as many as the psychologists. They probably had a team of 60, and there probably were about 5 Black psychologists, and there were no Black psychiatrists. So I do think as far as therapy services, there is more access to clinicians of color, but it's still an issue because that, like, for me, I always have a waiting list. And I know right now I'm only doing therapy 1 day a week because of my other job. So I'm not doing therapy 7 days a week. But even when I have friends that are therapists and I'm looking for a therapist, that I can refer out to because I just don't have the capacity. A lot of times they have waiting lists because there are so few of us. So one thing that I want to do more work on is like kind of figuring out how we can get more people going into the field that are people of color becoming therapists, because you see a lot of people like maybe doing social work, but once it gets to therapy and things like that, you don't see as many clinicians of color. So it's getting better, but we still got so much work to do.
Okay. Tell me this. What are things that people can do kind of to take care of their mental health while they're waiting? You know, if they decide this is what I want to do, they finally, get up the nerve to call that
Yeah.
therapist who says, I have a waiting list and it's going to be a couple of months before I can see you. What are some self-care type tips that you can, share with us about how people can take care of themselves until they see that therapist?
Yeah, yeah. Self-care, that's one of the other big buzzword that's out now, other like trauma informed care. And so a lot of people talk about like the typical things for self-care, like going to maybe get a massage or, going to, journal and things like that. And I think those are all great things for self-care. But there's some other things that we don't even think about that may seem like common sense, but just doing things like setting boundaries, like on your schedule, setting boundaries with like people that are maybe unhealthy, people that you may need to disconnect from, because they are bringing negative energy to your life. So it just really, just some things like that, really, whatever fills your cup, whatever things fill your cup. I think like having, like if it's like going out to dinner with friends, just finding some time, to really make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And it differs for everybody, just something that makes you feel good. So I know that there's not a specific thing, that for every person it's different, but I'm thinking like things like, making sure you're doing things that whatever fills your cup, you continue to do that and do that on a regular basis and be intentional about it. Because if you're not intentional about it, it's not going to happen.
Thank you so much for joining me today. And I want to leave us with these last words that I try and live my life by. To thine own self be true. Thank you so much, Jamila.
I love it. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Program is brought to you by the Kansas City Business Association.